a 730-kilogram brute so fierce that even seasoned troopers refused the saddle. At Romani in August 1916, as the battle turned to chaos, that same horse defied every limit, carrying 5 desperate men through gunfire and sand, an impossible feat that upended military protocol. If Bill the Bastard was not meant for glory, how did he become a legend no one could forget? The answer begins in a dusty Australian camp, years before desert gunfire made him famous. At Liverpool Army Camp in 1914, a new arrival quickly became the talk of the stables. Bill was a chestnut whaler, taller and heavier than most, with a long back and a stubborn streak that seemed to grow by the day. Whenever a hopeful recruit swung into the saddle, Bill launched into action, bucking, twisting, sending men flying into the dust before they had time to blink. It didn't matter if the rider was a city boy or a seasoned bushman. No one stayed on for long. Stable hands started taking bets on who would last the longest. The answer, every time, was nobody. It didn't take long for Bill to earn a reputation. Some called him cantankerous, others just called him trouble. But the name that stuck came from a frustrated sergeant after another spectacular spill: Bill the Bastard. Official records from the camp listed him as Unridable. Even Banjo Patterson, who oversaw remounts, wrote in his diary that you can't lead Bill the Bastard to anything, and you certainly can't make him drink. With no one willing to risk their neck, Bill was pulled from the lineup of cavalry mounts and assigned to hauling supplies. He carried crates and ammunition instead of troopers, his broad back loaded down while the other horses headed out for drills. Around camp, Bill became a legend for all the wrong reasons. Recruits swapped stories about the time he broke loose and sent a lieutenant tumbling into a water trough, or how he once kicked a feed bucket clear across the yard. To the men, he was a walking warning sign, a beast best avoided. Yet behind that stubborn glare and those unpredictable hooves, Bill was more than just a problem to be managed. He was powerful, smart, and when he wanted, almost gentle. But to most, he was simply the horse nobody could ride, a brute with a name to match, and a future that seemed destined for the supply train, far from glory or heroics. Few horses in the Australian light horse matched Bill's size or stamina. Standing at 17.1 hands and weighing close to 730 kilograms, he towered over the rest, a chestnut whaler bred for the kind of harsh work that broke lesser animals. Whalers were prized for endurance, able to survive on little water and push through heat, dust, and endless miles. Bill's build, with a broad back and heavy frame, made him a natural for heavy loads, even if his attitude kept him off the cavalry roster. While others drilled for battle, Bill's days were spent hauling crates, ammunition, and sometimes wounded men. In the chaos of Gallipoli, he carried supplies up and down the ridges, his hooves finding grip where others slipped. On May 19, 1915, Bill was chosen to transport the body of John Simpson Kirkpatrick, the stretcher-bearer known as Simpson, and his donkey, after Simpson was killed by sniper fire. The assignment was grim, but Bill took it on without protest, his reputation for trouble set aside when the job demanded it. Danger shadowed every run. Turkish snipers and shrapnel made even the supply lines deadly. Bill survived 2 bullet wounds at Gallipoli. 1 bullet remained lodged in his flank for the rest of his service. Reports from the field noted his uncanny ability to keep moving under fire, never faltering or panicking, even as shells burst nearby. Where other horses might bolt or freeze, Bill pressed forward, his bulk and nerve turning him into a favorite among the quartermasters who relied on him to get supplies through. His war record stretched across Egypt and the Dardanelles. Each mile hardened him further, and each wound added to the legend. By the time he reached the Sinai, Bill was more than just a stubborn brute. He was a survivor, a veteran of the trenches, and for those who paid attention, a horse with the kind of grit that could not be measured by medals or citations. The men might have joked about his temper, but no one doubted his strength or his heart. Michael Shanahan's service file reads like a ledger of hard marches and harder choices. Born in Roma, Queensland, he signed up as a carpenter and rose through the ranks by grit and reputation, not family connections. The 2nd Australian Light Horse Regiment listed him as steady under fire, a man who led from the front and watched over his men. His Distinguished Service Order, awarded after Romani, would later cite conspicuous gallantry and devotion. But before medals and citations, Shanahan was simply the officer who refused to give up on a horse that everyone else had written off. Letters home, though rare, hint at a stubborn optimism. In one letter he wrote that the horses there are as tough as the country, and some are as wild as brumbies. There is one, Bill, who has more fight than a platoon of Turks. Fellow officers remembered him as patient, the sort who would spend hours in the stables after dusk, talking to the animals as if they were old friends. He did not try to break Bill with force. He tried licorice all sorts, soft words, and long silences. Over weeks, a grudging trust grew. Bill, who had bucked off every other rider, stood for Shanahan. The pair became a curiosity in the regiment, the major and the horse who answered to no one else. Archivists sorting through field rosters and supply ledgers found Shanahan's name beside Bill's again and again, always in the margins where odd jobs and urgent missions were penciled in. The two were assigned to the grimmest tasks: hauling wounded, delivering ammunition under fire, retrieving the fallen. Soldiers started to notice that when Shanahan rode Bill, the horse moved differently, less defiant, more focused, as if the two shared an understanding forged by hardship. Their bond was not born from legend, but from the quiet, daily work of war. In the chaos to come, that bond would mean the difference between life and death. In the Sinai Peninsula, the sand stretched in every direction, broken only by the rolling ridges near Romani. August 1916 brought a heat that pressed down on every man and horse. The Australian Light Horse, along with British and New Zealand units, had dug in along these dunes, holding a fragile line against the Ottoman forces pushing west. The ground itself was a challenge, deep shifting sand that swallowed boots and hooves, draining energy with every step. Water was scarce, the sun relentless, and the horizon shimmered with the promise of more trouble. On the night of August 3rd into the early hours of the 4th, the Ottoman army launched a sweeping attack. Their aim was to outflank the Allied line, using the cover of darkness and the winding dunes to close in on the defenders. The Australians faced not just the enemy, but the terrain itself. Patrols reported bottlenecks where the sand narrowed, turning every withdrawal into a race against encirclement. Units became separated in the confusion, some cut off entirely as the enemy pressed forward. The sound of rifle fire echoed off the dunes, mingling with shouted orders and the thud of hooves laboring through sand. In these conditions, the difference between safety and disaster could be measured in yards. The terrain offered little cover. A rise in the sand might shield a man for a moment, only to leave him exposed the next. As the Ottomans advanced, small groups of Allied soldiers found themselves stranded, unable to retreat or regroup. The sand, already a daily enemy, became a trap. For men and horses alike, every movement was a struggle, each step a gamble between escape and capture. Historians describe the Battle of Romani as a contest not just of armies, but of endurance. The dunes shaped every decision, every maneuver. The night of August 4th would test the limits of both men and animals, setting the stage for acts of desperation and, for some, unexpected heroism. The night air over the Romani dunes pulsed with rifle fire and shouted orders. In the swirl of dust and confusion, 4 Tasmanian troopers from the Australian Light Horse found themselves stranded, cut off from their unit by a sudden Ottoman push. Their horses were lost or killed, and the men crouched low behind a shallow rise, bullets snapping overhead, the sand around them pocked with new craters. They were far from safety, at least 3 miles away, and the enemy lines pressed closer with every minute. Reports from the 2nd Light Horse Regiment later noted the chaos of that retreat. The Tasmanians' position was exposed, with no cover but their rifles and the hope that someone might notice their absence. Communication lines had collapsed, and any attempt to run meant a sprint across open sand under direct fire. The men faced a choice: wait for help that might never come, or risk breaking for the rear and likely be shot down before reaching it. Their situation grew more desperate as the Ottoman advance tightened around them, the sounds of battle swelling and then receding as units shifted and regrouped. Major Michael Shanahan, already on the move with Bill, caught sight of the isolated troopers. The decision to act came without hesitation. Shanahan steered Bill toward the rise, urging the horse forward through the soft sand and into the danger zone. Bill's broad chest and heavy frame forged a path where most horses would have balked. As he reached the stranded men, Shanahan called out, his voice barely audible over the gunfire. The troopers scrambled up, 2 swinging onto Bill's back, the others gripping stirrups and tack, clinging to whatever handhold they could find. There was no time for careful mounting or second guesses, only the raw need to move, and move now. The rescue was not a charge but a calculated dash, threading through the narrowest gaps between Ottoman positions and Allied lines. Every moment on the sand exposed them to fresh danger. Bill, carrying the weight of 5 men, drove forward with a determination that defied his reputations as a troublemaker. Behind them, the enemy fire intensified, but the horse and his unlikely cargo pressed on, each stride cutting the distance between death and a slim chance at survival. Gunfire cracked overhead as Shanahan gripped Bill's reins, knees pressed tight against the horse's broad sides. The sand churned beneath them, every step a gamble. There was no time for orders or plans, only instinct and speed. 2 troopers, faces streaked with sweat and dust, swung themselves up behind Shanahan, boots scraping for purchase on the battered pack saddle. The other 2 clung to Bill's sides, hands locked around stirrups and straps, their bodies pressed flat against the horse's heaving flanks. 5 men in all. More weight than any mount was meant to bear, let alone in the middle of a running battle. Bill shifted under the sudden load, muscles bunching as he adjusted to the crush of bodies. Shanahan leaned forward, murmuring steady words, feeling the horse's pulse through the leather and sweat. The geometry was desperate. 2 riders balanced behind the major, 2 more hanging on for dear life, boots dragging through the sand, every jolt threatening to unseat them. There was no room for error. A stumble, a slip, and someone would fall into the open, exposed to the rifles that spat from the ridge. The distance to safety stretched across nearly 3 miles of open sand. Ottoman bullets kicked up dust at their heels as Bill gathered himself, surging forward in a labored canter. Shanahan didn't look back. He could feel the strain in Bill's stride, the horse's chest rising and falling like a bellows. Each second on the open ground was a test of nerve and muscle. The men held tight, knuckles white, trusting in the only thing between them and the enemy. A horse, once written off as unridable, now carrying more than any man had dared ask. Bill's hooves tore through the sand for nearly 3 miles, carrying more than half a ton of men and gear across ground that swallowed lesser horses whole. The distance alone would have tested any cavalry mount, but Bill was no ordinary horse. Each stride sent shockwaves through his long back and thick legs, muscles straining under a load that, by any measure, bordered on impossible. Major Shanahan's wound, a bullet to the thigh, bled steadily. His grip locked on the reins, his mind fixed on the battered silhouettes clinging behind and beside him. The 5 men together weighed close to 400 kilograms, not counting rifles, packs, and the heat pressing down from above. Veterinary records from the period show that even the strongest whaleyeur was expected to carry a single rider and kit, rarely more. Bill's size, 17.1 hands, 730 kilograms, put him at the very top of his breed. But no manual ever planned for a horse to haul 5 men through deep sand at a canter. Modern equine experts have studied the story, some skeptical, others simply awed. Biomechanics suggest that a horse of Bill's stature could manage such a feat only in short, desperate bursts, the kind of effort that risks tendon tears, laminitis, or worse. The fact that Bill not only survived, but kept his feet under such strain, is a testament to both his physical power and a will forged by war. When the group finally reached the safety of the Allied lines, Bill staggered, sides heaving, sweat darkening his coat. Shanahan slid from the saddle, his uniform soaked with blood, but he refused to let go of Bill's bridle. In that moment, the cost of the dash borne in muscle, bone, and nerve became clear. For the men who owed their lives to the horse, and for the major who had staked everything on a single impossible run, the aftermath would linger far beyond the battlefield. After the desperate run, Bill stood trembling, foam streaking his chestnut coat, while Shanahan pressed his face to the horse's neck. In the hush that followed, the 5 men slid to the ground, their hands shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. Shanahan fished out a crumpled licorice allsort from his pocket, pressing it into Bill's lips. The horse, still quivering, took the sweet with a slow, deliberate chew. For a long moment, neither man nor horse moved. The veterinary officer arrived, checking Bill's legs and running a hand over the old wound in his flank, still warm from the strain. Shanahan refused a stretcher, limping beside Bill as they walked the final 3 kilometers to the field post. Word of the rescue spread quickly through the camp. But for Shanahan and Bill, the bond was sealed in sweat, blood, and licorice, a partnership witnessed in the quiet after the storm. In a quiet park in Murrumbara, a bronze statue stands taller than most men, capturing a moment that would have faded without witness. Bill the Bastard, muscles coiled and head raised, carries 5 soldiers, one astride and others clinging, frozen in the impossible act that defined his legend. The sculptor, Carl Valerius, spent years studying records and stories before unveiling the statue in 2019, determined that Bill's story would not vanish with the last veterans. For every Bill, there were thousands more. Over 130,000 Australian horses were shipped overseas during the war, and almost none returned. Most ended their days far from home, their service measured in silent sacrifice. Bill's memory, cast in metal, stands for all of them, a reminder that courage and endurance are not only found in men, but in the animals who carried them through the dust and fire. The cost was shared, and the legacy endures. Today, military animals are often memorialized, yet the unpredictable loyalty of a single horse still challenges how we define courage and partnership in war. As conflicts grow ever more technological, Bill's story reminds us that true heroism often defies expectation, both human and animal. In remembering him, we question what future legends might be waiting, overlooked, just beyond the edge of belief. What do you think? Share your thoughts below.